The samurai rule that makes people respect you without saying a word. Miyamoto Musashi never asked for respect. He became it. In a world drowning in noise, where everyone screams for attention, posts for validation, and performs for approval, those who follow this samurai rule never need to. They walk into a room and the air shifts. They speak once, and everyone listens. They do nothing and command everything. This isn't about arrogance. It's about presence. And by the end of this, you'll understand why silence holds more power than 1,000 words ever could. Watch carefully. Because what you're about to learn, most people will never grasp. Look around you. The modern world has become a theater of desperation. Men explain themselves constantly. They justify their decisions. They seek permission. They apologize for existing. Every action comes with a caption. Every achievement demands acknowledgement. Every opinion begs for agreement. And in doing so, they erode the very thing they're trying to build: authority. Musashi observed this centuries ago, not in social media, but in the dojo, on the battlefield, in the eyes of men who talked themselves into weakness. He called it lack of form, the condition of a soul that tries to fill its inner void with external validation. The warrior who constantly explains his strength has none. The leader who needs to remind others he's in charge isn't. The man who defends his every move is already defeated. Because true respect isn't given. It's recognized. And it's only recognized in those who don't chase it. So how did Musashi, and the warriors who walked this path, command respect without uttering a word? Through principles, through disciplines, through truths that separate the predator from the prey, the master from the student, the unmoved from the reactive. The first truth is this: you cannot control the room if you cannot control yourself. Musashi spent years in solitude, not because he hated people, but because he understood something profound. Every twitch, every nervous laugh, every need to fill silence, every fidget, every glance seeking approval, these are confessions. They scream, "I am uncertain. I need you to tell me I'm enough." The samurai trained not just his sword, but his breath, his gaze, his stillness. He could stand in a room full of enemies and not flinch, not because he was fearless, but because he had mastered the fear. Think about the last time you were in a tense situation, maybe a confrontation at work, maybe a difficult conversation with someone you care about, maybe a moment where you felt challenged, tested, judged. What did you do? If you're like most people, you filled the space. You explained. You defended. You tried to make them understand. You needed them to see your side. And in that need, you surrendered your power. Because the moment you need someone to understand you, you've given them authority over you. The moment you need someone to agree with you, you've made them your judge. The moment you need someone to respect you, you've confessed that you don't respect yourself. Musashi knew this. He wrote in the Book of Five Rings, "Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world." Not because the world matters more than you, but because the man who is not attached to his own image cannot be manipulated by it. The man who doesn't need to be seen as strong cannot be provoked by accusations of weakness. The man who doesn't need to be seen as intelligent cannot be baited by suggestions of ignorance. He is free, and freedom is the foundation of presence. You cannot command respect if you're enslaved to the opinions of others. You cannot project strength if you're dependent on validation. You cannot embody authority if you're constantly asking for permission to exist. Let me take you back to feudal Japan. Picture a young samurai, barely 20 years old, walking into a tavern in a small village. He's been traveling for weeks, training alone in the mountains, sharpening not just his technique but his spirit. He enters the tavern and the room goes quiet. Eyes measure him. Hands drift toward weapons. The tension is thick. There are older warriors here, men with reputations, men with scars, men who have killed. They see this young man and they want to know, is he a threat or is he prey? The young samurai doesn't puff his chest. He doesn't announce his lineage. He doesn't make threats. He doesn't even acknowledge the stares. He simply walks to a corner, sits with his back to the wall, and orders tea. His posture says everything. I am not here to prove anything, but I am ready for everything. And that's what breaks them. Because the man who needs to intimidate is afraid. The man who has to posture is insecure. But the man who remains calm in chaos? He's dangerous. One of the older samurai, a man known for testing young warriors, approaches. He stands over the young man's table and speaks loudly, so everyone can hear. You sit like you own this place, but I don't know your name. I don't know your school. I don't know if you've ever even drawn blood. The room waits. This is the test. This is where most young warriors would rise, would puff up, would recite their achievements, would draw their sword to prove their worth. But the young samurai simply looks up, meets the older man's eyes, and says nothing. 3 seconds pass, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. The silence becomes unbearable, but not for the young samurai, for everyone else. Because in that silence, the young warrior has revealed everything. Your words don't move me. Your reputation doesn't impress me. I have nothing to prove to you. The older samurai, feeling the shift, feeling the room turn, tries again. Are you deaf, boy? Or are you a coward? And still, the young samurai says nothing. He simply takes a sip of his tea, his hand steady, his eyes calm, and in that moment, he wins. Not through aggression, not through words, but through absolute self-mastery. This is the power of non-reaction. This is what Musashi meant when he wrote, "Do not let the enemy see your spirit, not because you should hide who you are, but because your spirit, your center, your core, should be so deeply rooted that external provocations cannot touch it." The modern man has forgotten this. He reacts to everything. Someone criticizes him on social media, and he writes a paragraph defending himself. Someone questions his decision, and he needs to explain every detail. Someone disrespects him, and he must immediately demonstrate his value. And in doing so, he broadcasts his insecurity to the world. He announces, "I need your approval. I need your understanding. I need you to see me as I see myself." And once you need something from someone, they own you. But here's what most people don't understand about silence and non-reaction. It's not passive. It's not weakness. It's not avoidance. True silence, the silence of the warrior, is active. It's observational. It's strategic. When Musashi faced an opponent, he didn't just stand there waiting. He was reading. He was studying. He was understanding patterns, tendencies, weaknesses. He was 3 moves ahead before the first sword was drawn. And this is what separates the master from the amateur. The amateur reacts. The master observes, decides, and then acts with precision. The amateur gives his energy to every provocation. The master conserves his energy for what matters. The amateur needs everyone to know he's strong. The master lets his actions speak for themselves. Let me give you a modern example. There's a man, let's call him David, who works in a corporate environment. He's competent, intelligent, good at what he does. But he has a colleague, let's call him Marcus, who constantly undermines him. In meetings, Marcus questions David's ideas. He makes subtle jabs. He takes credit for collaborative work. He positions himself as the authority. For months, David tried to fight back. He defended his ideas. He called out Marcus's behavior. He tried to rally others to his side. And every time he did, he lost a little more respect. Because everyone could see what was happening. David needed to be right. He needed to be seen. He needed validation. And that need made him weak. One day David changed his approach. In a meeting where Marcus questioned one of his proposals, David didn't defend it. He simply said, "Noted," and moved on. When Marcus tried to take credit for a project, David didn't argue. He let it happen. When Marcus made a subtle jab, David smiled slightly and said nothing. And something strange started to happen. People started to notice, not David's words, but his composure, his refusal to engage in the petty warfare, his ability to remain unbothered. And slowly, Marcus's tactics stopped working. Because without David's reaction, Marcus's provocations fell flat. He looked desperate, aggressive, insecure, and David, by doing nothing, rose in everyone's estimation. This is the psychological warfare of non-reaction. When you refuse to play the game, you change the game. When you refuse to defend yourself, You make your detractors look foolish for attacking. When you refuse to seek approval, you become the person everyone wants approval from. It's counterintuitive. It goes against every instinct we have. Because we're taught from childhood that we need to stand up for ourselves, speak our truth, make ourselves heard. And yes, there are times for that. But those moments are rare. Most of the time, silence is stronger. Most of the time, observation is wiser. Most of the time, non-reaction is more powerful than any words you could say. Musashi wrote, "The warrior's way is the twofold way of pen and sword." He understood that true strength is not just physical, it's mental, it's emotional, it's spiritual. The samurai who could not control his mind was a danger to himself and others. The samurai who could not master his emotions was a slave to circumstance. The samurai who could not discipline his spirit would never achieve greatness. And so the training was holistic. It wasn't just about learning to fight. It was about learning to be present, to be aware, to be unmoved by the chaos around you. This is what we've lost in the modern world. We think strength is about assertion. We think power is about dominance. We think respect is about being loud, being seen, being heard. But the opposite is true. Real strength is restraint. Real power is self-control. Real respect is earned through presence, not performance. Let me tell you about another principle Musashi lived by. Know your enemy better than he knows himself. This wasn't just about combat. It was about understanding human nature. The samurai who understood human psychology could defeat an opponent before the fight even began. He could see the fear in his enemy's eyes. He could read the tension in his enemy's body. He could predict his enemy's move 3 steps before it happened. And this observation, this deep understanding, came from silence, from watching, from not reacting. When you're busy defending yourself, you're not observing. When you're busy explaining yourself, you're not learning. When you're busy seeking approval, you're not understanding the game being played around you. But when you're silent, when you're still, when you're observant, you see everything. You understand the dynamics. You recognize the power plays. You identify the insecurities. And with that knowledge, you become untouchable. There's a story about Musashi in his later years. He was already famous, already feared, already respected. A young samurai, eager to make a name for himself, challenged Musashi to a duel. This was common. Young warriors would challenge masters to prove themselves. Usually the master would accept, demonstrate his superiority, and the young warrior would learn humility. But Musashi did something different. He agreed to the duel, but he arrived late. Very late. The young samurai waited for hours, his anger growing, his anxiety building. When Musashi finally arrived, he didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He simply drew a wooden sword, a bakken, while the young samurai held a real blade. The young warrior was insulted, enraged, convinced that Musashi was mocking him. He attacked furiously, all technique abandoned, all strategy forgotten. And Musashi, with minimal effort, disarmed him in 3 moves. The duel was over. The young samurai sat in the dirt, humiliated, defeated. And Musashi said, "You lost this fight before I arrived. You let your anger control you. You let your need to prove yourself blind you. A warrior who cannot control his emotions cannot control his sword. This is the lesson. This is the principle. This is the rule that makes people respect you without saying a word. When you master yourself, when you control your reactions, when you refuse to be moved by provocation, you become a force that others must reckon with. Not because you're aggressive, not because you're loud, but because you're centered, grounded, unmovable. And in a world of chaos, the unmovable become landmarks. They become the standards by which others measure themselves. They become the authority without ever claiming it. Now, let's talk about posture. Not just physical posture, though that matters too, but the posture of your entire being. How you carry yourself, how you enter a room, how you stand in conversation, how you hold yourself in moments of pressure. Musashi trained his students to walk with purpose. Not rushed, not slow, but deliberate. Every step intentional, every movement economical. No wasted energy, no unnecessary gestures. This wasn't about being robotic. It was about being present. When you move with intention, people notice. When you stand with groundedness, people feel it. When you hold yourself with quiet confidence, people respect it. Compare this to the modern man who fidgets, who checks his phone constantly, who shifts his weight nervously, who avoids eye contact, who fills every silence with meaningless chatter. These are not signs of weakness in themselves, but they are signs of discomfort, of uncertainty, of a man who is not at home in his own skin. And people sense this. They may not consciously recognize it, but subconsciously, they understand. This is not a man of authority. This is not a man of power. This is a man seeking approval, seeking validation, seeking permission to exist. The samurai understood that your body language speaks before you open your mouth. In fact, your body language often speaks louder than your words. You can say all the right things, but if your posture is weak, if your gestures are uncertain, if your energy is scattered, your words lose their impact. But if you stand grounded, if you move with purpose, if your presence is calm and centered, you don't even need words. People will listen when you do speak, simply because you've already established yourself as someone worth listening to. This is not about being intimidating. It's not about making yourself bigger or more aggressive. It's about being fully present in your body, fully comfortable in your skin, fully at peace with who you are. And that peace, that comfort, that presence is magnetic. It draws people in. It commands attention. It earns respect. Think about the people in your life who have this quality, the ones who don't need to announce themselves, the ones who don't need to prove anything, the ones who simply are, and in their being, they command the room. What do they have in common? They're not the loudest. They're not the most talkative. They're not the ones seeking attention. They're the ones who are comfortable in silence. They're the ones who listen more than they speak. They're the ones who observe before they act. They're the ones who don't react to every provocation. They're the ones who seem to operate from a place of deep inner certainty. And that certainty is what makes them magnetic. Because in a world where everyone is uncertain, where everyone is seeking validation, where everyone is performing, the person who is simply themselves, fully and unapologetically, stands out. Not because they're trying to stand out, but because everyone else is trying so hard to fit in. Musashi wrote, "You must understand that there is more than one path to the top of the mountain." He was talking about technique, about strategy, about the many ways to achieve victory in combat. But the principle applies to life. There is more than one way to earn respect. There is more than one way to establish authority. There is more than one way to make an impact. But the most powerful way, the way that requires the most discipline and yields the greatest results, is the way of presence, the way of silence, the way of non-reaction. This is not the easy path. It's much easier to react. It's much easier to defend. It's much easier to explain. It's much easier to seek approval. But easy doesn't lead to respect. Easy doesn't lead to authority. Easy doesn't lead to power. The hard path, the disciplined path, the warrior's path, that's where transformation happens. That's where you become the man who commands respect without saying a word. Let me share another story. There was a businessman, let's call him Robert, who built a company from nothing. He worked tirelessly for years, made smart decisions, took calculated risks, and eventually built something substantial. As his company grew, he started getting invited to industry events, conferences, networking dinners. These events were filled with people trying to impress each other. Everyone had a pitch. Everyone had a story. Everyone was selling themselves. Robert would attend these events and he noticed something. The most successful people, the ones with real power and influence, they weren't the ones talking the most. They weren't the ones with the flashy presentations. They weren't the ones working the room aggressively. They were the ones sitting back, observing, asking questions, listening. And when they did speak, everyone listened. Because they had established themselves, not through self-promotion, but through presence. Robert decided to adopt this approach. At the next event, instead of trying to network with everyone, Instead of pitching his company to anyone who would listen, he simply showed up, found a good vantage point, and observed. He listened to conversations. He watched interactions. He identified who the real players were. And when he did engage, he asked thoughtful questions. He listened more than he spoke. He didn't try to impress anyone. And something interesting happened. People started approaching him. They wanted to know who he was. They wanted to know what he did. They were intrigued by his quiet confidence. By the end of the evening, he had more meaningful connections than he had made in the previous year of aggressive networking. Why? Because he stopped chasing. He stopped performing. He stopped seeking approval. And in doing so, he became valuable. This is the paradox of respect. The more you chase it, the more it eludes you. The more you need it, the less you receive it. But the moment you stop chasing, the moment you stop needing, the moment you simply exist in your own authority, respect finds you. This is what Musashi understood. This is what all great warriors understood. This is what all true leaders understand. You cannot demand respect. You cannot negotiate respect. You cannot buy respect. You can only embody it. And embodiment comes from the inside out. It comes from knowing who you are. It comes from being comfortable with who you are. It comes from not needing external validation to confirm your worth. When you know your worth, when you're certain of your value, when you're grounded in your purpose, you don't need to announce it. It radiates from you. People feel it. They sense it. They respond to it. Now, let's talk about the power of observation without reaction in more depth. This is perhaps the most difficult skill to master, because it goes against our primal instincts. When we're attacked, we want to defend. When we're challenged, we want to prove ourselves. When we're disrespected, we want to retaliate. These are natural responses, but natural doesn't mean optimal. The samurai trained to override these natural responses. They trained to create space between stimulus and response. When an opponent attacked, the untrained warrior would react immediately, often predictably. But the trained warrior would observe the attack, understand the intention behind it, see the openings created by it, and then respond with precision. This is not just about physical combat. It's about every interaction in life. Someone insults you. The natural response is to insult back. But what if you paused? What if you observed? What if you asked yourself, why is this person insulting me? What are they trying to achieve? What insecurity are they revealing? And in that observation, you gain power, because you're no longer reacting, you're choosing. And choice is power. Someone challenges your idea in a meeting. The natural response is to defend it immediately. But what if you paused? What if you said, tell me more about your concern? What if you listened, really listened, to understand their perspective? In that moment, you've done several things. You've shown confidence in your idea by not needing to defend it immediately. You've shown respect for the other person by listening to them. You've shown wisdom by seeking to understand before responding. And you've maintained control of the interaction. This is the power of observation without reaction. It's not passive. It's strategic. It's intelligent. It's powerful. The reactive person is controlled by external circumstances. The observant person controls the circumstances. The reactive person is a puppet, dancing to whatever strings others pull. The observant person is the puppet master, seeing all the strings and choosing which ones to pull. Musashi spent years perfecting this skill. He would place himself in dangerous situations, not to fight, but to train his observation. He would walk through hostile territories, visit gambling dens where violence could erupt at any moment, attend gatherings where tensions were high, and he would practice remaining calm, remaining observant, remaining non-reactive. He would watch how conflicts escalated. He would study how men revealed their intentions through subtle body language. He would learn to sense danger before it manifested. And this training saved his life countless times, because he could see the attack coming before it happened. He could sense the shift in energy before the violence erupted. He could identify the real threat among many distractions. This is what observation without reaction gives you: clarity. When you're not busy reacting, when you're not consumed by your emotions, when you're not defending your ego, you can see clearly. You can think clearly. You can act clearly. And clarity is perhaps the most underrated form of power in the modern world. We live in a time of information overload, of constant stimulation, of endless distractions. Everyone is reacting to everything. The news, social media, work emails, personal drama. Everyone is in constant reaction mode. And in this chaos, the person who can remain calm, who can observe without immediately reacting, who can create space between stimulus and response, that person has an enormous advantage. They can see patterns others miss. They can identify opportunities others overlook. They can avoid traps others fall into. They can respond with wisdom while others react with emotion. This is not about being cold or unfeeling. It's about being in control of your feelings rather than being controlled by them. The samurai felt fear, felt anger, felt pride, felt all the emotions that humans feel, but they didn't let those emotions dictate their actions. They felt the emotion, acknowledged it, and then chose their response. This is mastery. This is discipline. This is power. Let me tell you what happens when you start practicing this. At first, it's uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Your instinct to react will be strong. Someone will provoke you and every fiber of your being will want to respond immediately. But you'll pause, you'll breathe, you'll observe, and it will feel like you're swallowing your pride, like you're being weak, like you're letting them win. But stay with it. Keep practicing, because something interesting will start to happen. You'll notice that when you don't react, the provocation loses its power. The person who was trying to get a rise out of you will be confused. They'll try harder. They'll escalate. And if you still don't react, they'll eventually stop. Because without your reaction, their provocation has no fuel. It's like trying to start a fire without oxygen. It just won't work, and you'll notice something else. People will start treating you differently. They'll be more careful with their words around you. They'll respect your boundaries more. They'll listen when you speak, because you've established yourself as someone who doesn't react to every little thing, someone who has self-control, someone who has presence, and presence commands respect. You'll also notice that when you do choose to respond, your response carries more weight. Because you're not someone who reacts to everything, when you do react, people pay attention. They understand that if you're choosing to respond, it must be important. This is the power of selective engagement. When you engage with everything, your engagement becomes meaningless. When you engage selectively, your engagement becomes valuable. Think about it this way. If a person complains about everything, their complaints stop mattering. But if a person rarely complains, when they do complain, people listen. If a person criticizes everything, their criticism becomes noise. But if a person rarely criticizes, when they do criticize, people take it seriously. If a person is always reactive, always emotional, always dramatic, people stop taking them seriously. But if a person is usually calm, usually composed, usually measured, and then they show strong emotion, people understand that something significant is happening. This is strategic emotional expression. This is intelligent engagement. This is the way of the warrior applied to modern life. Musashi also understood the importance of what he called the void, or emptiness. This is a difficult concept for Western minds to grasp, but it's essential to understanding the samurai way. The void doesn't mean nothingness. It means freedom from attachment. When you're attached to your image, you can be controlled through threats to that image. When you're attached to your possessions, you can be controlled through threats to those possessions. When you're attached to others' opinions, you can be controlled through manipulation of those opinions. But when you're free from attachment, when you're comfortable in the void, you become uncontrollable. This doesn't mean you don't care about anything. It means you're not enslaved to anything. You can value your reputation without being controlled by fear of losing it. You can value your relationships without being controlled by fear of abandonment. You can value your achievements without being controlled by fear of failure. This is freedom. This is power. This is the void. And from the void comes presence. Because when you're not busy protecting your image, you can be fully present. When you're not busy seeking approval, you can be fully present. When you're not busy defending your ego, you can be fully present. And presence is magnetic. Have you ever been around someone who is fully present? Someone who looks at you when you speak, who listens without planning their response, who engages without agenda? It's rare. It's powerful. It's memorable. Most people are not present. They're thinking about the past, worrying about the future, planning their next move, wondering what others think of them. They're anywhere but here, anyone but themselves. But the person who is fully present, who is completely here, who is entirely themselves, that person commands attention. Not because they're demanding it, but because presence itself is attention-worthy. In a world of distraction, presence is revolutionary. In a world of performance, authenticity is rebellious. In a world of noise, silence is profound. The samurai understood that combat was not just physical. It was psychological. It was spiritual. It was a test of presence. The warrior who was present could react in time. The warrior who was distracted would be too slow. The warrior who was worried about the outcome would be too tense. The warrior who was confident in his skill would be too rigid. But the warrior who was simply present, who was in the void, who was empty of attachment and full of awareness, that warrior was unbeatable. This is what Musashi meant when he talked about no mind, or mushin. It's the state of being fully engaged without being mentally cluttered. It's the state of being ready for anything without being tense about anything. It's the state of being powerful without needing to prove power. This is the ultimate goal of samurai training. Not just to be skilled with a sword, but to be present, aware, and free. And these qualities translate directly to modern life. Imagine living your life from this place. Imagine walking into any situation with no need to prove yourself, no fear of judgment, no attachment to outcome. Imagine engaging in any conversation without needing to convince, without needing to win, without needing to be right. Imagine facing any challenge without panic, without doubt, without the mental clutter that comes from attachment to specific results. This is possible. This is what the samurai way teaches. This is what Musashi embodied. And this is what makes people respect you without saying a word. Because respect is not about what you say, it's about who you are. And who you are is revealed not in your words, but in your presence, in how you carry yourself, in how you handle pressure, in how you respond to provocation, in how you exist in the world. So here's the practice. Here's how you begin to walk this path. Start with self-observation. Notice when you feel the need to explain yourself. Notice when you feel the need to defend yourself. Notice when you feel the need to prove yourself. Don't judge these impulses. Just notice them. Become aware of them. This awareness is the first step. Then, start creating space. When you feel the impulse to react, pause, just for a moment, just for a breath. In that pause, ask yourself, is this reaction necessary? Is this reaction strategic? Is this reaction coming from a place of strength or a place of insecurity? Most of the time, you'll realize the reaction is not necessary. It's just habit. It's just ego. It's just conditioning. And in that realization, you can choose differently. You can choose silence. You can choose observation. You can choose presence. Start practicing this in low-stakes situations. Someone makes a mildly annoying comment. Instead of responding, just smile and say nothing. Someone challenges a small decision you made. Instead of defending it, just acknowledge their perspective and move on. Someone tries to bait you into an argument. Instead of engaging, just observe their need to argue and decline the invitation. Practice this. Make it a game. See how often you can catch yourself about to react and choose not to. See how much power you reclaim by not giving your energy to every provocation. See how much respect you gain by not needing to defend yourself constantly. As you practice in low-stakes situations, you'll build the skill. You'll strengthen the muscle of non-reaction. And then, when high-stakes situations arise, you'll be ready. You'll have the discipline. You'll have the control. You'll have the presence. And here's what you'll discover. Life becomes simpler, clearer, more peaceful, because you're no longer expending energy on meaningless reactions. You're no longer getting dragged into petty conflicts. You're no longer giving your power away to every person who wants a piece of it. You're conserving your energy for what matters. You're focusing your attention on what's important. You're living from a place of choice rather than a place of reaction. And people will notice. They'll respect you more. They'll seek your opinion more. They'll value your time more. Not because you've become more impressive, but because you've become more present. Not because you've achieved more, but because you've needed less. Not because you've proven yourself, but because you've stopped trying to. This is the samurai rule that makes people respect you without saying a word. It's not a trick. It's not a tactic. It's a way of being. It's a practice. It's a discipline. It requires daily effort. It requires constant awareness. It requires the courage to go against social conditioning that tells you to explain yourself, defend yourself, prove yourself. But the reward is immense. The reward is freedom. The reward is power. The reward is respect. Not the shallow respect that comes from performance, but the deep respect that comes from presence. Not the fragile respect that requires constant maintenance, but the solid respect that comes from inner strength. Not the respect that others give you grudgingly, but the respect that others give you naturally because they recognize in you something rare, something valuable, something worth respecting. Musashi spent his entire life perfecting this way of being. He fought over 60 duels and never lost. Not because he was the most skilled swordsman, though he was highly skilled. Not because he was the strongest, though he was strong, but because he mastered himself. He mastered his reactions. He mastered his presence. He became the void, and from the void, he became unstoppable. You don't need to become a samurai. You don't need to fight duels. But you can adopt the principles. You can practice the disciplines. You can walk the path. And as you do, you'll discover that the power you were seeking outside yourself, in others' approval, in external validation, in social status, that power was always inside you, waiting, ready, accessible the moment you stop chasing and start being. So speak less, impose more, not through aggression, not through arrogance, but through presence. Master yourself. Stand unmoved. Observe without reacting. And watch as the world leans in, not because you demanded it, but because you embodied it. Musashi didn't write books to convince people he was great. He lived in a way that made greatness undeniable. And so can you. The way of the warrior isn't learned, it's remembered. Remember who you are. Remember your power. Remember that you don't need permission to be respected. You don't need approval to be valuable. You don't need validation to be worthy. You already are all of these things. You just forgot. The samurai way reminds you. The practice reveals it. The discipline unlocks it, and the respect follows naturally without you saying a word.